Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. A big Unstuck welcome to today's guest, Denise Karkos. Did I say it correctly?
You did.
Amen. Who's our guest today? Denise is currently the Chief Marketing Officer at SiriusXM. This followed a terrific career at TD, where, if I remember correctly, because I was around at the time, I actually had a job at the time, you were CMO of the year, which was terrific. But you had a terrific career there. And like me, you started off in the media business, agency business. So at least we have that in common. So welcome.
Right.
I appreciate you taking the time from lovely South Bend, Indiana.
Oh, so happy to be here. So nice to meet you.
So I want to get into your career, and on paper, when you look on LinkedIn or you hear your story, you just have this truly terrific career, where you've done some wonderful things and you've progressed incredibly well, and it always looks good on paper, and no doubt it is. But my feeling, certainly based on my experience and the people I've talked to over the years, is it's really the hard knocks and the downs of your career that really become pivotal in terms of shaping who you are, in building you up, and life lessons and all of the positives that come out of the negatives. So rather than talk about how brilliant you are, which you are, I'd love to talk about the shitty things that happen and the
Well, I'm sorry. I
challenges.
thought you were here just to hear how brilliant I am. So I
Yeah,
gotta
no,
go.
we'll get to that.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
But yeah, I'd love to hear about some of the knocks you've took over the years, or or watching other people take knocks, because that's been an experience for me, and how that's shaped your decision making and your career curve and how you lead.
Yeah, I feel like early on in my career, I was kind of climbing the agency ladder, which arguably in retrospect may be easier, like getting from assistant media buyer to media buyer. And I remember those wins were like every year, getting a promotion and feeling like I was on this massive trajectory. And then all of a sudden you get, to media supervisor, and you're like, okay, I want the big job, media director. Like that was my dream. And I think one of the most important things I did was really step back and say, so is that the aspiration? Like, is that it? Or is there more for me? And so one thing, we can talk about at some point is just finding what makes a decision of, is that my goal, or is there something more for me out there? And at that point I decided that I wanted the biggest people leadership job I could have, which was a CMO. And then I kind of carved my path there. But I think one of the things I always reflect upon is in that journey to aspiring to be a media director to aspiring to be a CMO, big jump, right? And in order to get there, I surrounded myself with people who would give me advice on what that path should look like, tips on how to show up, what to do, what I'm doing well, what I'm doing wrong. And it's remarkable to me that I think people underestimate the value in putting as much effort into the relationships as you put into the work. Like you got to have baseline capabilities. Like you can't just phone that in. Of course, everybody knows that. But like I put overtime into relationships and really, really listening to the feedback. And part of that probably comes from being an athlete. Like I want to be coached. I'm super coachable. Like tell me what I'm doing wrong. Let me figure out how to get better at it. And I think some of the moments that have really helped me were, I remember working at TD, and I was there for 14 years. And at one point in my career, I had a new boss, and we didn't speak the same language at all. And I kept trying to be more Denise, trying to make him like me, be more winning others over, and all of that. And it was not working. And I just calmed down, sat in meetings with him, and watched who got his attention. And there was one person in particular that was massively successful. And this is important to me. New boss, I want to grow under his leadership. How do I do that successfully? And I took this person out to lunch and just said, like, how do you work with this person? And what am I doing that I can learn from you? Because I see that you're having success. And I got the best advice because it was applicable the moment I went back to the office. And it was, this boss appreciates and values questions, and you give answers. And I thought about myself, first grade, front of the room, hand in the air, I got it. And when you get more senior, like, that's actually not what's valued. Like, challenge me,
By the
ask
way,
me a deeper
we
question.
would have got on great.
In
FYI.
kindergarten, we would have been BFFs.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah. So he told me, just simple, be more curious, ask more questions. And I love that advice because I applied it immediately and became successful under this leader. So it's things like that, knowing we're being very perceptive of how you're showing up and if you're being successful or not, and then not being afraid to ask for advice. And I think the person that I asked advice of, I don't even know if that person liked me. So it was a little humbling to to go to them and ask for like their advice, but like it helped me. So just one example of many things that have helped me.
But in that, you said something that I definitely wanted to talk about, which is this reference to sport. And for those who don't know, you were a D1 soccer player at Notre Dame, captain of the team or something like that.
Yeah,
If I
that's right.
remember, I know a lot of people who went to school with you. But I wanted to talk about, because it's sort of intrinsically wired into you, and I see it in the language. But I'd love you to talk more explicitly about how being an athlete at that caliber influences how you are as a business person. And we were talking in the beginning, as I spent time with the person who was a trader, ran a trading company, and his point of view was, wherever possible, I'm going to hire, particularly quarterbacks, but any sort of high level D1 successful college athletes, because of their ability to forget a bad play and keep playing and not let it drag them down. And it sort of, he's the transfer to doing a bad trade and letting it consume you. That's just one of those. But I'm sure that in your career, that sort of intrinsic um, mindset and discipline and behavior of being an athlete is transferred. And I'd love to hear about it, because I think there's fabulous lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I think I'll start with, it's kind of a few parts to this, which is in sports, it's very clear if you win or you lose. In business, you can walk out of a meeting and get all caught up in your own head as to whether it was successful or not. And that really trips people up and slows people down in their career and sacrifices their own success because you get into your brain. And so what I do for myself and what I do for my team is I try to define what a win looks like. Going into an important meeting, going to a conference or an event or whatever it might be, define the win. Like, okay, coming out of this meeting, sometimes the win is get in and get out unscathed. And I think for me, I set my mindset of like, how am I going to feel good coming out of this meeting? So I first define the win for you and for your team, because it's a little gray in business. And then secondly, get the feedback to know kind of how you're doing or how that went. And don't be onerous about that, but like just have a mechanism where you can have like a quick pulse check in real time, just so you can keep moving forward. And if you yourself think you did terribly or you get the feedback that you bombed, this is the point that your friend made, get over it. Like, and I said, give yourself 24 hours to wallow. Don't drive your partner crazy, like by like interrogating what happened. Everyone's leaving that meeting and going on to their own very full lives. They're not thinking about the trip up you made. They're going and dealing with their own stuff. So just get over yourself. And that's incredibly important. But I think the maybe the most important part of it is, if you can get over it, get on to the next thing. For me, what I've found is I'm really not going to be satisfied until I find the next win. And so, like, for your confidence, and which is massively important, super hard to coach how to be confident. For me, it's find your next win. And when you do that, like, it's just going to erase any of the history, and put you on that positive path again.
Just a sidebar, because you triggered this in me, and you might find this humorous. It involves Tony the Tiger. Um, as you know, Kellogg's was my client when I was at Leo Burnett for 17 years, give or take, and then I had the pleasure of working for Kellogg's directly. And I remember a long time ago a meeting about Frosted Flakes, and there was a debate about is it. There was a line that they had where it's like Tony gives you the confidence to succeed, and I went off and read a whole bunch of stuff, and I came back and it's like it's not the confidence to succeed; it's the confidence that comes from success. In other words, success breeds confidence. It's
I
not
love that.
confidence to succeed. And I always used to try create an environment, particularly for a more junior, to give them wins. And I think if you create like small wins, you build confidence as opposed to like, when I have the big win, I'll be successful. It's the same thing in college. It's like, when I get X, I'll be happy. It's no, when you're happy, you're going to get X. I don't know if you buy that, but I went nuts
I
for about a week
with
just reading up
I
on this
love
stuff.
I buy it. I buy it, hook, line, and sinker. And um, it's funny. I don't know why this. I guess we're conjuring up the past for each other. I remember when I was playing soccer at Notre Dame, I had stress fractures in my shins, and I was hiding it because I knew like I was going to be on that bench not playing if the trainer found me out. And I was practicing one day and I couldn't wear shin guards because my shins were just swollen. Like there were big bumps in my
Like,
shins. I couldn't wear shin guards. And so I had to kind of fess up to the trainer and the coach. I'm like, let me just play through this practice, but without shin guards. And they're like, "All right, whatever, we'll deal with it after practice." And one thing is like, I I love practice. Like I love it. Like I just love um, just putting it all out there. And I did it then that particular practice. And I'll never forget, my coach stopped the practice and said to the team, everyone, like, look at Denise. She's got practically two broken bones in her shins and she's working her ass off. And everyone else feels like they're kind of, phoning it in. Like, let's get on the line. Let's do some sprints. Let's get going. And it was one practice where I guess I was impressing him. After that, I was out for the whole season. So it was a awesome win and then a massive loss. But like I
wow.
still remember that moment, like getting the credit for the effort in view of an injury. But like, you're right. Like it's those little things that stay with you. And how do you? I love that you create space for that with your team. Like how do you do that for them? And I think that's a really important lesson as a leader.
I try, if the mic was the other way, we'd be spending about an hour and a half me talking about all the things I'd done wrong, and that would be sort of episode one of a 5-part series. Um, one I wanted to flip because it's connected to this, and you, when I've heard you talk and I've been around people who know you, you refreshingly frank, open, and sort of very clear about how you've managed your career, and you talked about it early on, but a perspective on how people should manage the career. Um, and I think that's really important because I think it's when people are clear on what they want and how they want to get there, and also sort of open minded that invariably never goes according to that plan, but broadly speaking, it's like you're driving from Chicago to South Bend, you may not exactly go down 94. You may take a couple of side routes and
Yeah,
stop off at
that's right.
Three Oaks or whatever. So
I love it.
I'd love your perspective on managing career, and I've heard you talk about your personal brand and that, and I think that's really helpful for people to hear for someone who's done it, arguably quite successfully.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think that what I touched upon earlier, that I think is the biggest gift I've had in my career is doing the hard work to really think about what the end goal is. And I did that in my late 20s. I decided that chief marketing officer was the goal. And it's hard work to get there because I remember when I went to TD, actually it was LL Bean. LL Bean had an amazing call center. And every person went through the call center during the holidays because it was like overrun with calls because it's LL Bean. And I remember taking a tour through that for a week, and I loved that job. And I thought, well, well, that's a big people leadership job, and I really enjoy that. Maybe I'll run call centers. And what that woke up in me was this notion of like, I love leading teams. And so, but let me stay in my sleeve of marketing after having put in, at that point, like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, um, and and figure out, what that, how to get to that end goal. And I set the time, 40 years old, CMO, that's the goal. And then, the advice I give to people all the time is, whether it's that goal or the mini goals to get there, as you build your network and your mentors around you, make it easy for them to help you. How many times have people set up a series of mentorships, mentee mentor, and you show up and it's just a little, you can tell the person forgot to prep, and half an hour before the meeting with the mentor, they've got like a made up list of things. And it's okay, but like, maximize that time, and tee it up for people to make it easy to help you. And I feel like I've done that, like, with very specific questions, very specific use cases or problem statements. You know, uh, for instance, when I was at a job kind of in my late 20s, early 30s, again, I sound like I can't get along with people, but like, I didn't, my boss just didn't like me. And there was no hiding from that. Like, there was no secret. Everyone saw it. I got reprimanded publicly in meetings, um, and I went to breakfast with a guy who worked at the agency that was trying to get our business. And so, I went to breakfast with him, and I told him what was happening, and that I'm trying to win his favor. And I asked for advice internally, and I'm just not getting it. And he said, "Well, what's the core problem?" And he said to me, "I think you've gotten by your whole career on your personality and not your brain." And this gentleman looked at me and said, "So what?" And it stopped me in my tracks, because I was thinking, okay, I have a massive weakness in that I show up kind of, bold and bright with personality, but I'm not showing that I actually have a brain, and what my SAT scores were. And he said, "Who cares? Like, that's part of the equation." And literally the next day I went to work for him. Um, and so I think, it is all about setting the end goal, not letting yourself get off track when the path takes a different turn, um, but also kind of understanding what your wayfinding mechanism is for the next job. And I think that's something I hear a lot of people ask about, is how do you know if the next job's the right one? And for me, it was, okay, what's the bigger leadership job? What's the bigger
Right.
impact I can make? And it wasn't how much budget am I managing. It wasn't even who I'm reporting to. It was, what's the biggest team and the biggest impact. That became the thing that lights me up. And it doesn't discriminate across category, in, be it financial services or entertainment or whatever. It just became the wayfinding mechanism for me to navigate my career.
It's funny, that story prompted something in my mind. One of the wonderful experiences that I had at Kimberly Clark was their absolute sort of maniacal commitment to talent and talent management. Um, and we used to meet regularly and talk about in substantive depth about our people. And there was a real investment in time in this at the most senior levels of the organization. But there was a term that kept coming up that sort of bothered me, because it had all kinds of baggage related to it, which was executive presence. And I remember talking to Kate, my wife, about this, which I generally go to her for like smart advice. And she said something absolutely brilliant. And it was this notion of leadership voice is so much more constructive way to get at the positive sides of executive presence. Because, as you know, executive presence sort of like, you need to be more like me, or this image of what I think sort of succeeds, as opposed to spending time and getting a sense of what your voice is and what makes you special and unique and what your superpower is, and then how you project that, um, in multi-dimensionally, because you have to be situationally aware. I remember once a girlfriend many years ago when I said something stupid at dinner with her parents. We walked out and she just glared at me and she said, "Gauge your audience." So thank you for the feedback. Um, but I think there's a really important thing, and once Kate said that to me, I spent a lot of time talking with the people I worked around about their leadership voice and what made them special and unique, and what their contribution was in relative to the others. Because I do believe teams are chemistry. I mean, if you think back to the soccer teams you played on, everyone has a role and a position, and if everyone had the same position and the same style of playing, I think I'm no athlete. It'd be a bit of a disaster. So I'm curious to get your perspective on it. And I know you've talked about your personal brand as part of that deal. In your experience, because I think a lot of there's a through line of your in your story, which is I'm committed to goals. I like to play to win. I have a very clear sense of what the end game is. I deal with adversity and move on. And if I take a hit, I train through it. And I'm a growth mindset. My favorite, Carol Dweck. And I want to be coached because
Yeah.
coaching helps me get that thing. It doesn't tell me I'm shit. It tells me how I can be better and all those things. So anyway, I'm babbling, but
No, you
I
just summed it up wonderfully, and it's never, the learning and the feedback, like it never ends. Like I'm still seeking it, 30 years in, like so it doesn't stop. Yeah, so I'd say a few things. I love the executive voice, and you're right. I do like to talk to people about like what their brand is, and it's the when your name shows up on someone's phone, like what's the net impression that leaves, and it goes anywhere from don't be an asshole, like you got to work with other people around you, and don't be the phone call that people dread, don't be the one-on-one people dread, and how that takes form is what that personal brand is. And you know mine is positive, motivating, energetic, and I'm team captain. Like that's the role I like to play. Now, how that shows up is super dependent on the culture. At TD, we're Canadian owned, and I have to. And this is also something people love to talk about. How much of yourself do you bring to work? Sorry, but I bring most of myself to work. Potty mouth aside, I try. And Canadian culture is very polite, and it's make sure that all the voices are heard. And I love TD. It was a wonderful collegial culture. But for me, temper my energy to allow for other voices in the room that may be a little bit more slow or passive at the table. So that was kind of there. At SiriusXM, it's an aggressive New York-based media company, and it is voices are like I literally got out of a meeting at my second week, and my awesome boss, she was like, "Why didn't you say anything?" I'm like, "Because 100
I've
people
become
were talking
Canadian.
over each and she goes, "We'll talk louder." And I was like, "That's awesome." So now I know how to show up here. It's
Right.
it take my style, positive, energetic, motivating, and insert it, but a little more dominantly here. So there's one thing about having a personal brand, but then don't forget to watch the room and know the culture you're in and how to show up. And I don't think that's a difference of like showing up 10% or 100% of yourself. I think it's just being smart and wise and watching the room.
Mm.
And then,
Well, that's
about, yeah, oh, sorry, go
no,
ahead.
no, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, the personal brand part is like, I remember having a gentleman who worked for me at TD, massively introverted, so smart, and like just so valued on the team. And um, he said to me, every time you do a leadership meeting, it's drinks. And not everyone's really into that. And I was like, oh, they're not? And so it's like little things like that where I'm like, who doesn't want a happy hour? Well, actually, probably 50% of the people don't want the happy hour, Denise. And I had to go overtime in team meetings to talk about the fact that I value introversion, and outside of the happy hours and that, but just on a day-to-day basis, that like your personal brand to be successful on my team shouldn't look like me. Like, I want to surround myself with people who are complementary, who are going to play different positions on the field. And introverts, deep thinkers, are a massive part of any team I want to build, because I can tend to run with 30% of the information. And my team laughs at me because they know that about me, and they are the ones who slow me down and help me think through some of the things that maybe that I should be. So, that to me is one part of the learning I still have, is don't forget the introverts in the room and make space for them, because they're wildly valuable, and they need to know that when you work for somebody who's a massive extrovert like me.
Well, I mean, there's such an important um, concept of like getting the team together of different talents and personalities. That I'm my next guest coming up is John Langford from the Mekongs, and I had to go and rewatch because it came out in like if I remember correct, like 2014, 2015, Revenge of the Mekons, and it was an incredible sort of documentary of the band. So I rewatched it, and there was a music critic who said, and the intent was to sort of a massive sort of an admiration of the Mekons and their trajectory, but she said something to the effect of, and I won't get 100% right, but it was like they're conceptually brilliant and executionally incompetent. And I was like, my immediate reaction was, that's brilliant. And I think she's talking about my career. But part of that was like, I knew that I couldn't land a freaking plane. And so, and I was like, I'm like dyslexic and conceptual, and I run around. And so you got to surround yourself with people who complement and augment and sort of build out the tapestry. Otherwise, you'll all be raving lunatics if you built in the image, certainly of me. And I think that's the important thing. And people tend to get the wrong signal, which is because if you're a forceful personality, which clearly you're not, but let's assume you're a forceful personality, people go like, oh shit, she wants me to be like her. And they go, no, I want to be like me, and I want you to be something else that, like, it's 1 + 1 = 5 kind of thing.
A
You
hundred
know, so
percent. 100%. I hired a brilliant analyst at TD. Just so good. And the first couple of weeks, all of our interactions were um, him talking to me about problems in the data, and things that need to be overcome, and how do we tackle this problem. And I was like, oh no, he hates it here. And I would be like, but we have this to look forward to, and this, and but there's something on the horizon. And I it was bothering me. And so I'm like, Denise, you've learned from managing people just to hit this one head on early days, week 2. So sat down with him and I said, every time you come into my office, I I want to cheer you up, but I don't think you want that. Can you help me be a better manager for you? And he said, hallelujah. Thank you for saying that. I see rain even when the sun is shining. And I wrote that line, I see rain even when the sun is shining, landed me, because he's like, it's what makes me a good executive, because I can, as an analyst, you want me to kind of look for the negative, look for the downside, interrogate every piece of a problem until we get to a solution, which we always will. But that's just how I show up. And it helped
well,
me tremendously. All the energy I was about to expend on making this guy happy wasn't what he wanted at all.
yeah,
And he was
it's called
brilliant.
it, it's called Eeyore. I you need Eeyore on the team. I was like, I have a friend, a guy who I had the joy of working with 2 separate times with Scott, and I used to call him Eeyore, and then he'd explain to me very intellectually that he's not actually Eeyore, and the archetype isn't the transfer, but it's the. And he was like, if you don't have me here, you'll start buying your own bullshit, which you sell to everyone else, and it's all wrong. So I'm going to help you sort of ground this shit if you want to really get it done. You need one of those on the team, as long as you know what their
Totally.
deal is. Listen, you mentioned Sirius, and we need to talk about it because it's such an interesting Sirius XM, which is not one brand, and I'd love to talk about it. And by the way, you have the brand that I fell in love with when they got launched, which is Pandora, which I think is, when that came out, it blew my mind because I think it's one of the most intelligent, revolutionary, absolutely brilliant things that I don't think has been fully deployed. I mean, I don't think you've it's played to its full potential, not just in music but broadly, and I think it was way ahead of its time. But anyway, Sirius, super interesting, a great case study of stuck and unstuck, because this, as I understand it, something beautiful was created, um, but now you've got to sort of evolve beyond the box that it's in terms of, certainly for Sirius, in the car and sort of satellite. And I'd love to hear your perspective on how you and the team are approaching the opportunity in the what I see as extraordinary upside that the collection of brands, the three main ones as I see them, sort of represent.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a fascinating place to work because you can find yourself in a meeting talking to an aerospace engineer about deploying the next satellite, and you can then find yourself talking about selling advertising on Pandora to another CMO, and it's the mind shifts that happen throughout the day. So I'll start with SiriusXM. 20 years ago, put satellites up in space and had an incredible technology where you can listen coast to coast with no interruptions, commercial free, if you pay for a subscription. And the business model is incredibly durable in that 85% of the cars that come off the line come with an embedded trial for free. And 35% of those convert to a paying subscription. And so it's an incredibly healthy, durable business model that we're massively proud of. Yes, it's getting disrupted in the car by CarPlay and people plugging in their phones and listening to Spotify. That is real, as well as listening to YouTube and other competitors. And we're not blind to that trend. We look at age cohorts and demographic shifts and where we're feeling the impact of that and where we feel incredibly resilient. And because of that, kind of the second brand is SiriusXM outside the car. So we are putting massive amounts of effort into building that app and making that an experience that today feels like a companion to what you find in the car, kind of radio channels. And our existing subscribers love that companion. So that's seamless listening. We used to talk all the time about like, you sit in your car and you listen to NFL play-by-play and you didn't want to miss on the Catholic channel, listen to Notre Dame, like you had to stay in your car. Now you can just toggle over to your phone and you can kind of walk into the house and still keep listening. And so that's a wonderful thing that consumers don't really know about. Our subscribers may, but there's a lot more opportunity out there with consumers. But in order to get the consumers to win favor as a net new relationship on the phone versus starting in the car, there's some product enhancements that we're making based on consumer feedback. And so as those are being made, we are also advertising with this campaign called the SiriusXM House, where we have all of our talent there. It brings to life the interactions that happen on the platform in a way that you understand. You're not going to see that on a competitor's platform. It's really unique to us. And we bring all that talent together for you, no matter how you want to consume it. And so that's the mission there, is to shift perceptions that we're not just in the car, while also protecting that durable business model in the car. And then Pandora. So we bought Pandora about 3.5 years ago, and no consumer would know that we're one company. And that's because it's different demographics. It's different value prop. Pandora is largely ad supported. About 90% of our listeners are on the ad supported tier versus SiriusXM, which is ad free and paid. So it's not worth me putting a lot of effort to talk about that we're one family, because there's no benefit to the end consumer and it's different consumers. And so for Pandora, I love what you said, because the people who invented the music genome are the most brilliant people in the building. Yeah, it's amazing. And, it's also like, I was having a conversation with some folks at Liberty who are, 82% owners of Sirius. And, we were talking about, there's like something super nostalgic about Pandora, and nostalgia is in right now, as we know. That like, what was your first song you ever listened to on Pandora? And can you build that capability in the app to really like go back and think about that? But people don't leave because they built their playlists. The app knows them so well that, like, how could I abandon it? So there's something emotional in that.
Right.
And I would say that I came in guns a-blazing, ready to really reposition this brand of Pandora, who had a lot of its share stolen by Spotify when Spotify came up with the ability to play a single song on demand, and Pandora took 3 years to also build that capability. So we really lost a lot of the young audience, and we were doing really well with the 35 to kind of 55-year-old cohort. So I thought that this was a brand perception problem that I can invest massively in order to make people aware that we have the same functionality as Spotify. And in fact, we've got a better ability to personalize the experience based on the music genome. But the economics of the business are such that it's really hard to be profitable and have a $300 million marketing budget. So I had to pivot my plan, and it's become much more about increasing time spent listening in order to monetize the ad revenue on platform. So it's another kind of work lesson in that I was so intoxicated with the idea of coming in here and showing the world what our team could do about repositioning Pandora with the young kids and winning favor. And that wasn't the job. The job was that we're a very healthy business with an older cohort, and we're a massively successful advertising business. And let's just make sure that we can kind of put our moat around that and grow that part, which we're doing really successfully. So it's, I think, being okay with that pivot as well.
But I'm not objective, and I always sort of have to remind myself that just because I think something doesn't mean that that's the perception broadly on the brand. But like, my mind of Pandora is I think there was a novelty in the beginning when it came out because it was such a new concept, and you probably got people and then they left. But I think it's a thinking person's brand in the sense that the intrigue of, certainly that was my experience, is the intrigue of, do they really understand what I like, and can they track me? And I used to mess with it and like sort of say, yes, I like to see where it took me. I always wanted to create 2 personas on Pandora and see what happened if I mess with it. But the
That's
notion
awesome.
of understanding and also longitudinally, because you mentioned this, is to see, has your music evolved and your style, your appreciation of it, has it evolved? So there's, anyway, at some point
it's a
I might
fantastic
apply
point.
for an intern job.
Hired. Well, one thing that we realized was that we've been so successful in personalizing your journey and serving you up the next best song. What we hear in socials and any kind of feedback is the word serendipity. Like, I can't believe you knew that I want to listen to Drake and then Hall & Oates. Like, how did you know? Maybe that's a personal example. Like, how did you know that? But one of the things that we've gotten much better at is that sometimes the personalization journey could be at the sacrifice of introducing new music, because that hadn't learned yet in terms of what the behaviors are that are parallel to a new song coming out. And so what else are these people listening to? So our programmers have done a phenomenal job of helping the algorithm with a little bit of human curation in order to make sure new music is still being served up to people like you who have been on the platform for a while.
The old guard, the old
Yeah.
people. Listen, it's
You and me
been
both.
listen, aging well. It's been a terrific 38 minutes. Jeez, time flies when you're having fun. I'm super appreciative of you making time. I've always wanted to have this conversation with you. Your reality is far greater than the ad, and the ad is pretty bright and shiny. So I'm so glad we got a chance to talk together. I know people are going to get a lot out of this, and hopefully we can do another one down the road. And I'm hoping I'll run into you in South Bend.
Me too. Thanks so much.
Denise, CMO SiriusXM, today's guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit ScreenDragon.com to see our software in action.